Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a portion of Scripture that often gets skipped, or at least skimmed.
Oh, for sure.
Because, let's be honest, at first glance, the opening chapters of First Chronicles look like a glorified ancient phone book, just filled with names most of us can't pronounce.
Right.
But if you shared these sources with us, you know better. You were looking for the strategic and spiritual blueprint hidden beneath all those lists.
Exactly.
The key to understanding what David and his successors meant for a community that was, trying to rebuild itself after a total catastrophe.
That's exactly our mission today.
Yeah.
To understand First Chronicles, you have to grasp the chronicler's context. This is not just a general history book.
Yeah.
It is a highly selective theological and an even political argument written for a very specific audience.
The community that had just come back from Babylon.
Yes, the community that had recently returned from the Babylonian exile around 539 BCE, right after Cyrus's Edict of Restoration.
And that timing is just so crucial. We're talking about a group of people who are, well, demoralized.
Completely. They are back in their homeland, but the temple is in ruins, the monarchy is gone, and they feel profoundly disconnected from their own glorious past.
They're struggling with who they even are anymore.
Precisely. They're struggling with identity and insecurity. And the chronicler's work, which is 1 and 2 Chronicles together, it was designed to review their entire history.
From the very beginning.
From Adam all the way up through the captivity and the promise of restoration. And the whole point was to provide them with hope, continuity, and an instruction manual for rebuilding.
So it's not passive history at all. It's an active tool for revitalization.
Absolutely.
So what were the 3 specific goals the writer was so laser focused on? I'm thinking especially about the details he included, or maybe even omitted, that we don't see emphasized in Samuel or Kings.
The chronicler had 3 primary strategic goals that dictated every single historical selection he made. The first goal was identity and purity.
Okay.
The extensive genealogies, which we'll jump into first, were a strategic tool to reestablish the legitimacy of this post-exilic community.
Because they've been scattered.
Exactly. After mixing with foreign nations and losing records during the exile, they desperately needed to prove who belonged, who was truly Israel, and that the Davidic and priestly lines were still pure and legitimate.
So identity first, grounding them in their own history. What about the second goal? Their practice.
The second goal focused entirely on proper worship and obedience. There is an immense, almost obsessive emphasis on the temple, the ark, and the precise organization of the Levites and priests.
He's spelling it all out to them.
He is. This was the chronicler's desire, to show the returned exiles how to reestablish their relationship with God strictly and correctly according to the Mosaic law, unlike their ancestors who failed.
Getting the system right this time. Okay, and the third goal, that has to be the antidote to their demoralization, right?
Yes, the third goal was purely encouragement and future hope. By recording David's glories, his decisive victories, his unparalleled wealth, and the stability granted to Solomon, the chronicler offered a magnificent, untarnished vision of a successful future.
He's reminding them what's possible.
He's reminding them of the potential of a nation operating under God's explicit favor. And crucially, the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon are central to this entire argument.
So they form a single focused arc then. Saul is the negative lesson.
The warning.
David as the one who lays the foundation, the architect of the whole system, and then Solomon is the builder who brings that system to life.
Absolutely. Half of the chronicler's entire narrative is dedicated just to them, and that story arc drives toward one singular climactic goal.
The temple.
The dedication and proper organization of the temple system, which is the heart of God's covenant with Israel.
So our mission for this deep dive is to follow that strategic roadmap. We'll start with how the chronicler established identity, then examine the model of kingship, analyze the absolute necessity of organized worship and obedience, and then we'll conclude with the sheer magnitude of the preparation David put in place for the future.
Right.
This transforms what seems so dense into a blueprint for recovery and ultimately for hope. So let's tackle the famous, or maybe infamous, opening chapters. The chronicler doesn't use the stories of creation or the flood. He jumps straight in with Adam's lineage.
Yeah, no introduction, just boom, Adam.
So why start there, with Adam, Seth, and Noah? What is the immediate strategic impact of that kind of universal start?
Well, the jump is instantaneous, and it's highly strategic because it establishes 2 things at the same time: universality and legitimacy.
Okay.
By beginning with the progenitor of all humanity, Adam, the chronicler, links this small, struggling, returned community all the way back to the very origins of God's global plan.
It's a way of saying you aren't just some small local tribe, you're part of something huge.
Exactly. It reminds them that their history isn't just a provincial story of one small kingdom. It spans all of world history. It's saying, you are the continuation of God's work since the beginning of time.
A huge confidence boost.
Immense. But then immediately the focus just narrows. From the universal Shem, Ham, Japheth the chronicler zeroes in on Shem's line, tracing it through Terah and Abram, who becomes Abraham, then Isaac, and finally Israel, who was Jacob.
Right.
This establishes the covenant foundation, proving that this community, the one reading the chronicler's work, is the heir of those ancient, unconditional promises made to the patriarchs.
The genealogies then throw us a bit of a curveball.
Yeah.
A really detailed list of Edomite kings, descendants of Esau, and they reigned before Israel even had a king.
Yeah.
Why bother with that? It seems like such a tangential historical digression.
It serves a crucial comparative function. The Edomites, as the descendants of Esau, Israel's brother, they were established with stable political leadership monarchs long before God established the monarchy in Israel with Saul.
So he's drawing a contrast.
He is. This detail subtly highlights Israel's unique, divinely elected path. Unlike their neighbors, Israel didn't just get a king because they wanted one. Their kingship was a divine installation, conditional on their covenant with God.
So it contrasts their sort of chaotic history of judges and divine selection with the, I guess, early human-centered stability of their neighbors.
It is a profound counterpoint. Their neighbors achieved political organization early, sure, but Israel was unique because their true king was Yahweh.
That makes the Edomite list not just history, but a theological argument.
That's it, exactly.
Now we get to the pillars of this restoration community. Judah, the line of the king, and Levi, the line of the priesthood.
Yeah.
Why is establishing the legitimacy of these two lines so important? Is this the main function of the genealogies?
It's everything. Everything the chronicler wants to achieve, the hope for a new Davidic kingdom and the reestablishment of the temple, it all hinges on these two pillars.
Right.
The post-exilic community needed proof that the people who were now in positions of power and worship were actually authorized by the law.
So when tracing the line of Judah, the chronicler moves with surprising speed. He goes through figures like Perez, Hezron, Ram, Nahshon, Boaz, and then lists Jesse's sons, quickly landing on David. Why the brisk pace here?
The goal isn't biography, it's legitimacy. The quick descent establishes the unbroken, legitimate royal lineage leading directly to David and, by extension, to Solomon, who is the central figure in the temple-building narrative.
It's an unbroken chain.
An unbroken chain. And there's a fascinating detail the chronicler includes, noting that David was the seventh son of Jesse. This may subtly hint at the completeness or perfection associated with the number 7.
Suggesting his elevation was divinely orchestrated.
Yes, and complete, despite not being the firstborn.
And then there's the meticulous detailing of the line of Levi. The emphasis really seems to fall on Kohath's line.
Yes. Levi's 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, are all listed, but the focus is on Kohath because that's the lineage of Aaron the high priest. The tracing is meticulous, Aaron through Eleazar, Phinehas, and Zadok.
But the chronicler doesn't stop with Zadok. He continues the line all the way down to Jehozadak, who he specifically notes went into exile with Nebuchadnezzar.
Right.
What's the reassurance there? By including Jehozadak, the exiled priest, what does that provide the readers?
It's a masterstroke of historical linkage. By naming the last priest before the destruction and the exile, the chronicler ties the legitimate pre-exilic worship structure directly to the community that returned home.
So it's a message of continuity.
It is. It's saying the line is unbroken, even through the destruction and the exile. The spiritual infrastructure remains legitimate, and when they rebuild the temple, they are using the authentic, God-authorized priesthood.
That continuity message is just immensely powerful for a people feeling so separated from their heritage.
It is the foundation for the entire book. This legitimacy is necessary because the second half is basically an exhaustive organizational chart for these Levites and priests for temple service.
Okay, moving past the core lines, the genealogies of the other tribes are sort of interspersed with these fascinating, almost miniature sermons. The prayer of Jabez in 1 Chronicles 4, it just stands out. It's a dramatic insertion amidst pages of sheer names.
It's a jarring but incredibly effective interruption. Jabez, whose name itself means pain, or sorrow because his mother bore him in pain, is highlighted as a man more respected than his brothers.
So why interrupt the whole list for him?
His prayer is a perfect, concise petition. If only you would greatly bless me and expand my territory. May your hand be with me, keep me from harm so I might not endure pain.
And the chronicler's conclusion is blunt and very encouraging.
He notes simply, God answered his prayer. For the post-exilic community who are struggling to expand their tiny return territory, facing political harm and enduring the pain of rebuilding, this anecdote is a profound model.
Yeah.
It tells them that despite their painful, diminished circumstances, Jabez's name, humble, focused, trust in God brings blessing and expansion. It shifts their focus from passive faith to active, faithful petition.
It provides immediate hope for territorial and numerical increase. Then we get this complex discussion of the lost birthright in chapter 5. This is the chronicler resolving a major legal and political problem for the reader.
It absolutely resolves the complex division of honor. Reuben, the biological firstborn, lost his birthright because he defiled his father's bed.
Right.
Judah subsequently became the strongest and provided the leadership, the kingship. But the actual birthright, the primary blessing of inheritance and multiplication, was given to Joseph's sons.
So the chronicler is explaining that power, Judah's kingship, and the principal blessing, Joseph's son's massive inheritance, were purposefully divided because of the original sin of the firstborn.
Right. It explains why the most powerful tribe, Judah, isn't carrying the explicit firstborn blessing. It clarifies the justice and sovereignty of God in reassigning those roles.
And this leads directly to the most powerful cautionary tale in the genealogies, the fate of the Transjordan tribes.
Yes, the Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh.
They initially demonstrate the ideal model of success, don't they? They achieve this massive successful battle against the Hagrites.
They did. They were incredibly well-armed and won a spectacular victory, seizing 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep, and taking 100,000 people captive. I mean, it was an astonishing military success and acquisition of plunder.
What was the secret to that victory, and why did the chronicler even include this success story?
The source material is adamant. They won because they cried out to God during the battle. He responded to their prayers because they trusted in him. This is the ideal for the returned exiles. Trust and petition God, and victory follows.
So it's proof.
It is proof that even distant tribes operating on the edge of the covenant land could achieve miraculous success through faith.
But the narrative immediately pivots to tragedy. That success?
Yeah.
It wasn't sustained.
A painful, painful warning. Despite that divinely assisted victory, these same tribes were unfaithful, abandoning the covenant to worship the native gods.
And the consequence.
Immediate and harsh. God stirred up King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, who carried them into exile. The chronicler emphasizes that they remained to this very day in exile.
The power of that phrase, to this very day, must have been chilling for the post-exilic reader. They are back in the land, having just returned from Babylon, but they know their brothers in the north are still gone.
It is a stark, undeniable lesson. Purity and obedience are not just theological niceties. They are the condition of remaining in the land and receiving blessing. Faithfulness is the only guaranteed condition upon which God's promises of security and blessing rest.
So the genealogies don't just affirm identity. They teach history as a constant lesson in cautionary obedience.
That's the core message.
Okay, so with that foundation of identity and history established, the chronicler shifts gears dramatically. The genealogy of the tribe of Benjamin leads us right into the first king, Saul. But his treatment of Saul is, well, it's highly unusual compared to the books of Samuel.
It is a profound editorial decision by the chronicler. In Samuel, Saul is a tragic figure, initially possessing charisma and success, who then slowly falls apart. The chronicler excises nearly all of Saul's early successes.
He cuts them out.
He does. He cuts out his charismatic triumphs and focuses solely on his failure and his death. He is used almost entirely as a negative blueprint. A man who was placed on the throne failed and was removed.
So the outline of his genealogy leads swiftly to his defeat and death on Mount Gilboa. Why detail the catastrophe so quickly?
It's necessary background and contrast. His failure is the dark backdrop against which David's divinely sanctioned rule shines. It establishes that David's kingship was not merely a political coup, but a divine transfer of authority.
And the detailed account of Saul's death itself is highly strategic for the chronicler's purpose.
It ensures legitimacy for David. Saul's suicide on his own sword, followed by the specific detail that the transfer of the kingdom was divine, is recounted to make one thing absolutely clear.
David had nothing to do with it.
David had no hand in Saul's demise. This removes any possible ambiguity or lingering political gossip among the returned exiles about how David ascended, neutralizing any claim that David was a usurper.
What were the specific singular failures of Saul that the chronicler wanted to highlight for this community, who were themselves struggling with so many pressures?
The text lists them explicitly, creating the chronicler's definition of disloyalty, which is the exact opposite of what the returned exiles must practice. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. Specifically, he did not obey the Lord's instructions. He tried to conjure up underworld spirits, a blatant violation of the law, and most fundamentally, he failed to seek the Lord's guidance.
That last point, failing to seek the Lord's guidance, that seems to be the ultimate sin here.
It is the root cause. The lesson is undeniable. Disloyalty and relying on one's own counsel or illicit means always results in catastrophe, and the result. God eventually killed him and transferred the kingdom to David, son of Jesse. The emphasis is on divine sovereignty, not political machinations.
This contrast brings us to David, who is presented as the immediate, unifying, God-fearing successor. David becomes king of all Israel at Hebron, but his first major move is the capture of Jerusalem. Why was Jerusalem, or Jebus, such a foundational strategic capture?
David understood that to unify the politically fractured nation, Judah in the south, Israel in the north, he needed a politically and geographically neutral capital.
And Jerusalem was right on the border.
It was right on the border between the tribes. It was not claimed by either Israel or Judah, making it palatable to all 12 tribes. It was a clean slate, essentially.
A clean slate.
Exactly. It established a secure base of operations, it unified the divided tribes politically, and crucially, it became the future epicenter of religious worship, which David would quickly exploit by bringing the ark there.
We see the anecdote of Joab being the first to attack the Jebusites and earning his promotion,
which establishes the political groundwork. But the chronicler is careful, as always, to point out the true source of David's immense power beyond the military genius of Joab. The emphasis is repeated consistently, serving as a mandate for the post-exilic community. David's power steadily grew because the Lord of Heaven's armies was with him. This shifts the credit entirely from human military prowess to divine favor.
And after this, we get these detailed lists of David's great warriors. This is more than just a roll call, isn't it? It's establishing David as a leader who attracted the best.
The lists are meant to inspire confidence. David won the confidence and support of the strongest, most capable men from all tribes, Judah and Israel alike. We see the exploits of the chiefs, like Jeshobeam, who is just fearsome, killing 300 men with a spear in a single battle.
And this section includes two unforgettable, almost mythological accounts that demonstrate David's unique quality as a leader. The first is the water incident at the caves of Adullam.
It's a remarkable piece of leadership insight. David, in the stronghold, expressed a simple, deep-seated wish, a longing for water from the cistern near the gate of Bethlehem, which was occupied by the Philistines.
Just a private wish.
A private wish, born of nostalgia and thirst. And his 3 elite warriors immediately take that wish as a royal command, risking everything. They break through the Philistine lines, fetched the water, and brought it back.
But David's response is what defines his kingship.
It is. He refused to drink it. He poured it out as a drink offering to the Lord, stating, "God forbid that I should do this. Should I drink the blood of these men who risked their lives?"
That's a profound moment. It shows his men that David valued their lives more than his own comfort. This is the quality of self-sacrificing leadership the chronicler is modeling.
Absolutely. And then we have the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, who seems less like a soldier and more like a mythic hero.
Let's talk about Benaiah. The chronicler goes into really specific detail about his almost unbelievable exploits.
The specific details are essential for bringing the history to life. Benaiah struck down the 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. He killed a lion inside a cistern on a snowy day.
A snowy day, such a specific detail.
It emphasizes his daring in extreme conditions. And he killed a colossal 7.5-foot Egyptian giant.
And the story of the giant is incredible because it highlights not just his strength, but his ingenuity.
Correct. The giant was armed with this massive spear, but Benaiah didn't meet him weapon for weapon. He attacked first with a simple club, And when the Egyptian was distracted, Benaiah grabbed the spear right out of the giant's hand and killed him with his own weapon.
These tales showcase the miraculous God-backed success that surrounded David.
Exactly.
And finally, we see the overwhelming national support David received at Hebron. The detailed count of armed warriors who came to make him king is just massive.
It proves unity was possible under a God-fearing king. But amidst this military tally, there's the small, crucial detail about the men of Issachar that ties back to the chronicler's focus on wisdom.
Right, there were 200 leaders among them who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. Why does the chronicler highlight this specific trait, understanding the times amidst all the military might?
It signals that David's success was never purely physical. Military might is necessary, but it must be coupled with strategic wisdom and an understanding of the political, historical, and divine landscape.
Okay, so for the returned exiles.
They needed leaders who could understand the times. David's support base wasn't just physical strength, it was spiritual and strategic intelligence.
Moving from the military and political model to the center of faith, David's next major mission is moving the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. This is the ultimate symbol of God's presence, but it starts with a major tragic failure. The error of Uzzah.
This is a foundational narrative for the chronicler. It's the first vivid object lesson on the absolute necessity of obedience over zeal. David decided to move the ark, which was an excellent spiritual decision. The problem lay in his methodology.
He violated explicit divine instructions. The law was clear.
Absolutely clear. The ark was meant to be carried only by Levites from the family of Kohath, using poles that were never to be removed, and it was never to be touched. David, however, put the ark on a new cart drawn by oxen, basically mimicking the Philistine method.
And when the oxen stumbled, Uzzah reached out to steady the ark.
And the Lord struck him down. He died right there. And David's reaction wasn't just sorrow. The text says he was angry. Angry that God had broken out against them, and then profoundly fearful.
So he stopped the mission.
He did. He left the ark at the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite.
So what's the ultimate insight here? What theological truth did Uzzah's death convey to that restoration community?
It conveyed that worship and celebration, which David and the people were doing energetically, can never substitute for rigorous obedience to God's revealed will. God must be approached on his terms.
Good intentions aren't enough?
Not at all. The holiness of God is absolute. And it's worth noting that Obed-Edom, who handled the ark with respect for 3 months, was subsequently blessed by the Lord, reinforcing the power of God's presence when approached correctly.
After this lesson, we see David seeking and receiving divine guidance in war, which is a sharp contrast with Saul's failure to consult God.
Yes, he continually asked God before every military engagement. Should I march up against the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?
And the most fascinating part is that God gave David different strategies for successive battles, which required this iterative obedience.
In the first victory, God told him to march up directly. In the second, God commanded him, don't march up after them, circle around them, and come against them in front of the trees. He had to wait for the sound of marching in the treetops.
And David's obedience to that specific, counterintuitive command led to total victory.
It's a model of responsive situational obedience.
So David's success allowed him to complete the mission he failed at the first time. He learned the Uzzah lesson fully.
In chapter 15, David prepares properly. He prepares a new tent for the ark and announces only the Levites may carry the ark of God, specifically citing the initial failure as the reason for the attack.
And this time, the process was meticulous. They carried the ark on their shoulders with poles, just as Moses had commanded. Obedience was married to celebration.
And this leads to David's great innovation, the birth of organized temple music. David didn't just move the ark, he established a full-time, perpetual, professional orchestra and choir.
He organized Heman, Asaph, and Ethan, representing the 3 Levite clans, to lead this massive musical service. The instruments are even specified, with these terms like Alamoth and Sheminith. What do those signify?
Well, the detail itself emphasizes precision and organization. Alamoth likely refers to the high or soprano voice instruments for upper registers. Sheminith likely refers to the eighth or bass accompaniment for lower registers.
So he established professional musical arrangements.
Yes, ensuring continuous high-quality praise. And David himself participates, wearing a linen ephod, which was traditionally a priestly garment, jumping and celebrating as the ark enters Jerusalem.
And this brings us to a profound theological concept. David acting as a priest.
Yes, he offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. He wasn't an Aaronic priest from Levi. The chronicler is showing David fulfilling the covenant role of a kingly priest after the order of Melchizedek.
which was promised in the covenant.
Exactly. It's a royal priesthood, distinct from the Aaronic line. And for the post-exilic community, this signaled that the Davidic line still held unique, permanent spiritual authority.
That makes Michal's reaction, despising David for his enthusiastic worship, even more critical then.
It highlights the conflict between two different concepts of kingship. Michal, Saul's daughter, represented the human-centered, self-dignified authority of her father. She saw David's passion as undignified.
Whereas David was modeling something else entirely.
He was modeling submission and joyous, undignified worship before the true king, God. His kingship was defined by submission, not by human pride.
The chronicler then includes David's magnificent hymn of thanks in chapter 16, which embodies this total submission. What is the key theological message of this song?
The hymn is structurally profound. It starts with a call to worship, extols God's covenant with Abraham and Isaac, and praises Yahweh's superiority over all other gods. The emphasis is entirely God-centered, and David appears to be the first in Scripture to boast in the Lord.
And that concept, boasting only in the Lord, is the necessary antidote to trusting in military might, which was Saul's downfall.
Exactly. It instructs the listeners to abandon trust in their own strength and to rely entirely on God's grace and past faithfulness.
Finally, David organizes the continuous service, establishing a split system.
Meticulous organization. Asaph and his colleagues served before the ark in Jerusalem, offering prayers and songs. Meanwhile, Zadok the priest and his fellows served before the tabernacle at Gibeon, offering the required burnt sacrifices morning and evening, strictly according to the law.
So he's honoring both the established law and authorized joyful innovation.
He is a dual focus.
Okay, so David, now comfortable in his cedar palace, decides he wants to build God a proper temple. This leads to the Davidic Covenant in chapter 17. Nathan initially agrees, but then God steps in.
The intervention is highly strategic for the chronicler. God forbids David from building the temple, giving two key reasons. First, God never requested a fixed house.
Right, he'd been in a tent since the Exodus.
And second, and more importantly for the chronicler's purpose, David is a warrior, a man who has spilled a great deal of blood.
So the temple must be built by a man of peace, or shalom.
Precisely, which is what Solomon's name implies. The focus shifts dramatically from what David will build for God to what God will build for David. A permanent dynastic house.
The covenant language is immense. I will become his father, and he will become my son. I will never withhold my loyal love from him. This promise is the ultimate source of hope, but the chronicler makes a massive strategic omission here compared to 10 Samuel.
This is the massive insight the listeners needs to grasp, the strategic omission of warnings. In 2 Samuel, the covenant promise to David's son is immediately followed by warnings of discipline and punishment if the son sins. The chronicler intentionally removes these warnings.
Why censor history like that? How does changing the covenant text serve his goal of encouragement?
It changes the message from one of conditional obedience and potential failure to one of absolute dynastic promise and hope. The post-exilic readers knew history. They knew Solomon failed, and they knew the monarchy collapsed due to sin.
So by omitting the warnings.
By omitting the conditional warnings, the chronicler steers attention past Solomon's failure toward a future, perfect, non-failing king, the anticipated son of David, the Messiah, who would carry out God's will perfectly. It focuses entirely on God's unwavering faithfulness, even when Israel failed.
It reframes the covenant as an unbreakable, eternal promise that must be fulfilled.
Yes, and David's response is the model of humility and thanksgiving. He is completely overwhelmed.
The next few chapters show the immediate fulfillment of God's promise to David. Victory, expanded influence, a glorious reputation.
David was immensely successful. He defeats the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, the Edomites, and the source is clear. The Lord protected David wherever he campaigned.
The campaign against the Ammonites in chapter 19 is particularly memorable because of the incredible humiliation David's messengers suffered at the hands of King Hanun.
It's a classic example of political catastrophe caused by foolish counsel. Hanun, wrongly advised that David's envoys were spies, seized them and performed an act of total public shame, shaved half their beards off, cut off their robes up to their buttocks.
A calculated humiliation.
Calculated to cripple David's image and provoke war. And David couldn't ignore that. So Joab is sent out, and he displays brilliant tactical deployment, dividing his forces and securing the victory.
And the physical threats to the kingdom were literally destroyed, including the descendants of Rapha, the giants of Gath.
Yes, the removal of the remaining giants, including the man with 24 digits, confirms that David was decisively ridding his kingdom of primordial, chaotic threats. His goal was peace, and he achieved it through conquest, preparing the way for Solomon.
Then comes the second major theological turning point after Uzzah, the census sin in chapter 21. David's lack of faith led him to count his warriors.
The chronicler notes that an adversary provoked David to trust in military numbers rather than divine providence. Joab tried to warn him, but David insisted.
The theological offense was relying on human strength.
A profound temptation for the post-exilic community. God was offended, and David had to choose his punishment. He chose the plagues, stating, "I prefer to be attacked by the Lord, for his mercy is very great." 70,000 men died.
And this entire tragic incident serves as the foundation for the future temple site.
It's the critical revelation. God instructs David to build an altar exactly where the destroying angel was standing, on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite.
A threshing floor, a place of commerce and meeting.
A non-idolatrous spot. And David insisted on paying 600 pieces of gold for it, famously declaring, "I will not offer to the Lord a burnt sacrifice that costs me nothing. Sacrifice must be costly."
And the fire descending from the sky to consume the offering is the ultimate divine confirmation.
It is. It signals that this specific location was the place God chose for his house and the permanent altar of sacrifice. David could then declare Solomon, "This is the place where the temple of the Lord God will be."
With the site secured, David moves into intense preparation for Solomon. He ensures his inexperienced son has everything he needs.
David's preparation is a model of faith and zeal. He explains to Solomon he was forbidden to build because he was a man of war, but Solomon, the man of shalom, will build it.
In the materials he gathers, the wealth is just incomprehensible.
Truly astounding. Massive amounts of iron and bronze, so much it couldn't be weighed. And he stored up 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver.
Which in today's terms is
Hundreds of billions of dollars, conservatively. This incredible preparation ensured Solomon would have everything necessary to succeed, removing any possible excuse for failure.
And David's final charge to his son then links that success directly to absolute obedience.
He demands commitment to the law. Be strong and brave. Don't be afraid and don't panic. You will succeed if you carefully obey the rules and regulations.
Okay, so this next section, chapters 23 through 27, is pure administrative detail, but it speaks volumes about David's strategic foresight. It's a blueprint for a stable, organized theocracy.
This section demonstrates David's organizational genius. When he was old, he started reorganizing the government, and crucially, the Levites. The stability of the future kingdom rested on the stability of the worship system.
He counted Levites aged 30 and up, 38,000 men. Since the ark was now stationary, their duties had to fundamentally change. What were the four major new functional groups he established?
Their ancient duty of carrying the movable tabernacle was now obsolete. So David transitioned them into permanent support roles for the future temple. He divided them. 24,000 to direct general temple work, 6,000 as officials and judges, 4,000 as gatekeepers, and 4,000 dedicated solely as musicians for praise.
A highly structured civil and spiritual service. I see the age requirement for service was changed here. Why did David change the age from 30 down to 20?
This reflected the practical need for more personnel. Carrying the ark required peak physical condition, but maintenance and music required sheer manpower. By lowering the age, David increased the pool of available, trained manpower significantly.
Next, the organization of the priests, the descendants of Aaron. This required a division of labor.
The priestly descendants of Eleazar and Ithamar were divided into 24 groups or courses, determined meticulously by lots.
Why the use of lots? It seems strange for such a crucial organization.
The lot system was a guarantee of fairness and a clear sign of divine ordering. By distributing the duties randomly, David ensured that all priestly families, regardless of political clout, shared equally in the honor of service. It prevented political maneuvering.
Then David organized the temple musicians, selecting 288 men from the families of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun.
And their unique role is described as prophesying with instruments.
Right.
They were prophets of praise, highly skilled, trained men who served the same purpose as the priests, continuous worship. They were also divided into 24 courses by lot, ensuring that music and praise mirrored the priestly schedule.
The staggering wealth stored in the temple complex required its own robust security system. The gatekeepers and treasury guards.
The sheer volume of wealth necessitated military-grade security. The gatekeepers were the temple police, organized into divisions by lot, assigning exact numbers to each post. They manned 24 guard stations, 24 hours a day.
And the treasures weren't just David's preparations, but items gathered over decades of Israel's history.
Levites were put in charge of storehouses, holding consecrated items dedicated by David, military leaders, even Samuel, Saul, Abner, and Joab. And the text notes they used battle plunder for temple repairs.
So it structurally links God's blessing in warfare directly to the financing of his dwelling place.
Exactly.
David even centralized governance outside the temple, appointing officers and judges.
This external administration is fascinating. The chronicler stresses their role. They handled matters pertaining to both God and the king. This ensured that judicial and civil governance across all 12 tribes was integrated with David's divine mandate.
Finally, chapter 27 details the structure of the military and civil officials. The key innovation is the rotating army.
This logistical marvel guaranteed military readiness without sacrificing the economy. 12 monthly army divisions, 24,000 troops each. This system guaranteed readiness while rotating most of the fighting force back to their homes and livelihoods each month.
A sharp contrast to the sometimes chaotic leadership we saw earlier in Samuel.
It is the model of an established empire. Everything was accounted for. David did all this organizational work to ensure that when he died, Solomon would face minimal confusion and opposition, fulfilling God's promise of rest.
Perpetual worship, perpetual administration, perpetual readiness. That was David's legacy.
That was his preparation.
We arrive at the climax of 1 Chronicles. David's final charge to Solomon and the assembled nation. He publicly announces Solomon's succession, chosen by God to rule on God's behalf.
He emphasizes immediately that kingship is stewardship. David reiterates the conditional nature of the promise for Solomon. He must remain committed to obeying God's commands and regulations to establish the kingdom permanently.
And then David reveals the stunning detail about the blueprints. He wasn't just directing construction. He was conveying a divinely inspired architectural vision.
He hands Solomon incredibly detailed blueprints for the temple, its courts, treasuries, and even the prescribed weights for every single gold and silver item. David explicitly affirmed, "All this I put in writing as the Lord directed me and gave me insight regarding the details of the blueprints."
This elevates the significance of the temple far beyond a mere building project. The very architecture was intended to be a sublime, revelatory vehicle.
The physical structure itself was part of the worship system. David urges Solomon, "Be strong and brave, do it. Don't be afraid and don't panic, for the Lord God, my God, is with you."
David then models the immense generosity he wants the people to emulate. His personal donation, which we noted earlier was staggering, inspires the entire nation.
It's a remarkable demonstration of corporate piety. The people are inspired and contribute willingly, and the chronicler lingers on their attitude, noting they were delighted with their donations, for they contributed to the Lord with a willing attitude.
That's the ideal the chronicler is holding up for his own community.
Joyfully committing their resources to God's purpose.
David's final prayer is arguably the theological apex of 1 Chronicles, tying their material prosperity back to its spiritual source.
He makes the ultimate statement of humility. Everything comes from you, and we've simply given back to you what is yours. He recognizes that despite their immense wealth and permanent-looking infrastructure, Israel and he himself are merely resident foreigners and temporary settlers.
That concept, resident foreigners, is profound for a community that had just returned from exile. It tells them their true citizenship isn't in their current rebuilt kingdom.
It is, but in God's eternal design, it puts all their prosperity in perspective.
The book closes with Solomon's peaceful ascension. He is anointed king a second time. David dies at a good old age, having enjoyed long life, wealth, and honor.
Solomon sits successfully on the Lord's throne, bestowed with greater majesty than any king before him. This successful transition solidifies the chronicler's argument. David the warrior and Solomon the man of peace represent two essential, necessary ideals.
Victory over enemies and a subsequent reign of peace.
And the chronicler uses them as a combined type, a perfect foreshadowing. That is the ultimate vision offered to the returning exiles. The two separate ideals of conquest and peace are meant to find their singular fulfillment in the future perfect king, the faithful son of David, the Messiah.
So the chronicler provided them with a foundation of confidence that God would fulfill the rest of the covenant.
Assuredly.
This deep dive really proves that 1 Chronicles is far from a tedious record. It's a highly focused, strategic, historical, and political argument. The chronicler ensured the exiled and returned community understood their legitimate identity through the pure genealogies.
And their required conduct through the vivid lessons of Saul's ultimate disloyalty and Uzzah's fatal mistake.
And most powerfully, they received the ultimate goal, the unwavering Davidic Covenant and the promise of a secure future, laid out by David in every administrative, military, and spiritual detail.
David's preparations, the consecrated site, the astronomical wealth, the perfect organization, made the eventual glorious temple possible, both physically and spiritually.
It transforms lists of names into a strategic roadmap for their survival, designed entirely to impart hope and encourage strict, joyful devotion to God's plan.
The chronicler built confidence by showing how God had fulfilled David's personal promises, but here is the lingering thought for you to carry forward. Despite David and Solomon completing so much, the chronicler understood that many Davidic covenant promises remained fundamentally unfulfilled. The full, eternal rest had not arrived.
And given that the monarchy immediately collapsed after Solomon and the temple itself was destroyed, that hope must have seemed distant to the post-exilic readers.
Precisely. So, what enduring promise were they, and are we today still waiting for? What anticipation? The perfect, non-failing king who would finally realize God's permanent dynastic house and eternal peace drove this entire, meticulously edited historical record.
That's the question.
The true driving force behind Chronicles is the persistent, tenacious hope in the ultimate, perfect Son of David, who must inevitably come to establish the rest David worked so hard to prepare for. That anticipation is the final, provocative thought the book leaves hanging for us today.